800-951-0592. Quickly before we get back to Edward Dowd. Late yesterday, I was able to secure 200 more $10 liberties. And I'm so glad. I had a feeling gold was going to be rallying. It actually rallied a lot of the day yesterday, continues that today, $1,970 gold. But I was actually on with the second largest wholesaler in the world this morning. I actually was talking to him this morning, and I'll just tell you what he's telling me. There are no coins out there. Now, got to remember what these guys consider no coins, right? Hey, if there's only 20, 30, 40, 50, that's no coins to them. They buy coins by the hundreds. They buy them by the thousands, and they're just gone. We talked about $20 and $10 pieces. And he just said, he goes, it's absolutely crazy. He goes, right now, just like I've been telling you, the 10s are the buy. Listen to how good it is today. Listen, 20s today, 2,410, 2,410 on 20s. And there's none out there. Two $10 liberties today because of the deal I bought yesterday. Yesterday we were at $11.90. Gold's up, $16, $17 today. Today I've got them at $1,180. That would mean two 10s are now $50 less than a 20. And it doesn't get any better than that. Buy them and buy them hard, because the people that I trust in these markets are saying that rate cuts are coming. We lost about the last 5 seconds of Dowd there. All as it was how many rate cuts? He thinks that the Fed needs 4 rate cuts, or essentially a full point of rate cuts. So you think about where the Fed wants to be. They want to raise one more time to get to that 5% number. And the markets are saying, hey, listen, we need to be 4% or less. And Jason, let's not forget, this is a simple bond math. It's so simple. It's not a credit crisis. Not yet. That's the problem. Not yet. But it's simple math. You have bonds you bought at 1%. They're now 5%. You're sitting on massive losses. Let me give you an idea of how big these losses are on these banks so people can understand. They finally dumped Silicon Valley Bank. The FDIC finally found a bank that would take over for Silicon Valley Bank. And by take over, I'm trying to get it here. Let me, I have it saved. I know I have it saved. Here we go. Sorry about that. I didn't know I was going to go there. So First Citizens Bank Corp is now taking over the deposits of Silicon Valley Bank, but there's a caveat. They are going to acquire $72 billion of Silicon Valley Bank's assets. So these are the securities we're talking about. But guess what? They're not taking them at face value. No. In order for them to take it, the FDIC is going to have to take a 23% haircut of $16.5 billion. So it gives you an idea of the losses that some of these banks are sitting on. 23% in the case of Silicon Valley. And by the way, they didn't buy them all. There was a ton. There was another $90 billion in assets that unfortunately the FDIC, nobody would take it. So it just tells you, I mean, what kind of losses would nobody take, right? So very interesting here. The FDIC says that they are stuck with about $90 billion of quote unquote assets of Silicon Valley Bank, which I'm assuming they're going to try to hold to maturity. The rest of it all said and done. Now the FDIC is anticipating a $20 billion loss for Silicon Valley Bank. So that gives you kind of an idea when he's talking about bond math, Jason.
Right. You know, and We'll see how this plays out, because you'd think a lot more banks would be suffering these ills right now. And it's funny how they do a little group of banks went under. Well, yeah. And why not all of them go under like Silicon Valley Bank now? Then why don't they see these problems now and start having a flood of problems? And this is where the controlled part comes in. It's like, well, what is the Fed telling these banks? What are they doing in these emergency meetings? Are they going to slowly move these assets in an orderly fashion so that they can try to push this thing farther? And Edward Dowd, I agree with him. Everything he's saying will happen, as long as it's as long as there isn't no shenanigans and hey, backroom deals where we're going to slide some money to, hey, and we know your assets are bad, but we can't let the whole system go. So we'll make sure you're taken care of. Just don't make a big noise about this. Don't go under now. We'll have you go under next year. Right?
That's what they're trying to do right now. You're nailing it right now. And listen, there's no secrets here. So far, we know. This is just what we know. Almost $500 billion. The Federal Reserve has pumped into these banks. That's what we know of, right? Because you got to remember, yesterday they gave some other sweetheart deal to First Republic. Who knows about the stuff we don't know? But it gets worse. So remember, he talked about the money supply. Think about this. Isn't this amazing? You're telling me that the last time there was a contraction in the money supply, it was 1930?
I said that on the air a few weeks ago, Joe.
1930? This is the last time, right? The last time. What does that tell you, right? This is, right, when you talk about Ponzi schemes, right? This is kind of what the banking system, we're kind of in a quasi Ponzi scheme, right? Because they need more credit all the time. And we know what happened, right? We know what happened the last time the money supply contracted. Well, look at what happened now, right? It happened in November. We didn't make it through March before we had another crisis, and all of a sudden the Fed's balance sheet blew up by $400 billion, right? So money supply contraction over, right? The problem is it's not over. Let's talk about, Edward Dowd talked about the money supply and contraction. Jack, let's play the next clip.
Typically speaking, recessions cause a contraction in credit. And they're usually, they get close to the zero line, but they never really go through it. So we've had instances where M2 got close to year-over-year negative growth, but never quite got there, even in the great financial crisis.
Gosh, I wasn't even paying attention. I talked too much. You know what? I promise I'm going to talk less. We'll get back to Edward Dowd in the next segment. By the way, take the break. Get those 10s, 1180 800 951 0592. We'll be back right after the break. $800-951-0592. Joe and Jason, the $10 lips. We got a couple of lines open. They're not going to make it out of this day. There's no doubt about it here. $50 less. So figure about $25 a half ounce savings here. $10 Liberty's $11.80. That means 2 10s, which would be the same as a 20, right? You're talking about a $50 savings, $2,360 on 2 10s versus $2,410 on the 20s. As I was telling everybody, I was the second largest wholesaler in the world. When they start uttering things like no coins, Jason knows the largest wholesaler in the world. All the emails we get from him now are saying, we're buying, right? We're buying. So pick him up while you can. And this is like the lead pipe stone cold lock of the week here. We're talking with Edward Dowd. We're listening to parts
Joe, real quick, Joe. We're buying too, right?
Yes, we're always buying too. So just so everyone knows, we always buy. But we're listening to Edward Dowd, and we're talking about contraction in money supply, contraction in credit. I want to give you an idea. Again, Jason brought it up. What about these other banks? Right now, they're trying as hard as they can because they don't want the market to know true value. Michael Burry was out this morning. The Fed needs to let the market set the price. The Fed cannot set the price for these assets. And let me just give you back to Silicon Valley Bank here. The amount of interest in their quote unquote securities, the word that the former Federal Reserve examiner used, underwhelming, which tells you that these banks, Jason, we know Silicon Valley, they may have been one of the worst actors, but even the bad actors out there, they all need to go. This problem is going to get a lot worse before it gets better. We've been saying that for a while.
Yeah, let's play the clip. We have enough time. I got plenty to say, but let's get that clip in. Jack, go ahead.
They're usually they get close to the zero line, but they never really go through it. So we've had instances where M2 got close to year-over-year negative growth, but never quite got there. Even in the great financial crisis, we never broke through the zero line. We're not even in the crisis mode yet, and we're already below zero. So what that says to me, and other market participants that I talk to, are saying that credit is there are defaults going on. Credit is being withheld by banks and credit card companies. So credit is contracting at an alarming pace. And this doesn't bode well for the economy as a whole, because unfortunately, credit is the lifeblood of the economy and the global economy. And that's going to be a big problem. And economic activity is going to grind to a halt over time. And now the good news is,
to a halt.
Yeah, like in the great financial crisis, the good news is inventories will be depleted, and eventually it's a cycle. And the Fed has been trying to prevent this cycle from happening for 14 years. And unfortunately, all this easy money is going to make this hangover way worse than it could have been if they had let a recession occur earlier in this cycle. But for some reason, the powers that be didn't seem to think the system could handle even the tiniest of slowdowns. So we've had this lethargic economic growth for a decade plus of just very low economic growth. Now, because of this insane propping up of the global economies with building credit debt upon credit debt, basically we solved the great financial crisis debt problem with more debt. So now we're in an even worse situation than we were in 2008, and so we have to pay the bill, and the bill is in the form of defaults and bankruptcies.
So, Edward, people can argue, we've heard this before. We've heard that we are at an inflection point several times before, and the can just gets kicked down the road. Why are you so sure that this is it, that this is the end of the road this time?
Couple things. So what did we see last year? We saw some things we've never seen before in the markets. We saw inflation go from 1 to 2% up to 9% headline inflation, while at the same time the U.S. dollar was advancing. In a commodity inflationary cycle, that's never happened before. Usually, inflation is a function of usually a monetary phenomenon. So we saw two things: commodities going up and the dollar going up. And my thesis then was the dollar going up is a sign of credit contraction globally, because a lot of international players have issued dollar-denominated debt. It's about 15 trillion in that debt. So as the dollar rises, it's harder and harder for them to pay us back. And so we suspect that due to the COVID lockdowns, supply chain disruptions, that the Fed should never have started hiking in the first place. Wow. The global economies were too fragile.
Wow. And
we had some interest rate indicators that showed, this is going to sound insane, but that the Fed rate hike cycle should have been over before it started, meaning the 3-month T-bill shot through the discount rate, and usually that's been the end of a rate hike cycle. This time, they kept hiking into what I think was a global economic slowdown, and here we are. And that's why I think this time it's too hard for them to turn on the money spigots and prevent what's going to occur from occurring. I think it's beyond their control.
And that's something that we've talked about, right? Beyond their control. Jason and I called it, right? The Fed's backed into the corner. They're in this box. There's no good outcome here. You know, the whole time they were talking transitory when they should have been raising rates. And then by the time they started raising rates, Edward Dowd said, hey, it was already too late. It's already too late. It's inevitable what is coming. I hope you're getting prepared. $10 Liberties on fire today at 1180. 800-951-0592. Jason and I got the final segment, but remember, we're going to carry this into at least the next hour of the Half Empty Cup. $800-951-0592. $10 Liberties at $1,180. I don't have a count on how many are left. We had a couple hundred, so we had a decent amount of supply, but that is $50 less than a 22 10s, $50 less. That's, I mean, $5, $10. I think last week, at one point we were like $45, $50 less. Gold's up $17 right now, $19.70. Silver's up 27 cents, $23.33. And Jason, I've got a bad feeling here, really bad. This is not over, not close to being over. And when we get back in the Half Empty Cup, I'll just let you know the next sections we're going to cover. Edward Dowd talks about how many banks are going to be left. He essentially, and I'll give you the headline here, 6. That'll be the big 6. And essentially, he called them government banks, is what he's calling them. There will be very few others left. That's one part of it. We'll also be talking about, he talks about the end of small business. And primarily because all the banks, 50+% of loans to small businesses are done by the smaller banks. And by smaller banks, I mean the banks that aren't in the top 6. Right? That's what we're defining as small banks, right? And U.S. banks, the top 6 U.S. banks. 50%. He says it's coming to an end. We're also talking about the digital currency. He tells us how long. And guess what? It ain't that long. By the way, is this planned? Well, Jason, who's been saying this from day one, Edward Dowd is going to chime in. Is Jason right? And then last but not least, the executive order that Joe Biden signed and how that is going to play out. So we've got a lot of this left. There's no way we could get it done in the hour, but I just want to give you a breaking headline here. Yesterday, I talked about the commercial mortgage-backed securities. We've got a problem. Let me give you the size of this. So this is about a $5 trillion market. Okay. And you know that I've told you that they don't pay these buildings off. They never do. They pay the interest and then refi every 5 to 7 years. Well, to give you context, in the next 12 months, $1 trillion of that $5 trillion is coming due. And according to the latest information being provided out there, they're saying that executives are struggling, that people aren't coming back to the office. They're calling the head of Columbia, calling it tone deaf. The Federal Reserve is tone deaf that this issue is coming. It's clear, it's present. The banks clearly have a right to be concerned. Just so if you want to add on to this, here you go. Here's another add-on to the problems at these banks. don't have your money in there. I keep telling you that. Get this gold put away. 800-951-0592. Jason and I were coming back with more on the Half Empty Cup.